Hi, it's Laura at Marine18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. If you have been watching my channel for a while, you may remember that I used to film monthly reading recaps. And sometimes these were videos that just included books and reviews of the books that I had read in a given month. And sometimes these were kind of end of month wrap-up videos that included other things that I had been enjoying in that particular month, along with books. I have not done this for quite a number of months now, but I miss it. I miss talking about all of the books that I read and getting the chance to share them all with you. And so I want to get back to doing that on a monthly basis. But this does present somewhat of a conundrum for me. I am filming this in early April of 2026, and I am feeling like if I'm going to go back to this kind of reviewing, I should share my thoughts on the books that I've read at least for the whole year, which means telling you about the 24 books that I read across the first quarter of the year, January, February, and March. Now, that's a lot to talk about. Certainly, perhaps too much to talk about in one video for somebody as long-winded as me. So I did ask on a post, what should I do about this? I want to talk about all of these books. And I had a couple of suggestions. One suggestion was to do one-sentence reviews as a kind of flash exercise, which, for a long-winded human is challenging. Another suggestion was to choose the kind of top 2 or 3 and maybe the least favorite 2 or 3 per month, and then just kind of list the rest and say, well, this is all of what I read. Here's the highlights and lowlights, right? What I've decided to do, since I like both of these suggestions, is to combine them. And what I thought I would do here is share some quick statistics about my reading in the first quarter of the year, share some highlights. So, not necessarily all of my 5-star reads or anything like that, but I've picked out 7 books, and I'm looking over here because some of them are in a pile. I've picked out 7 books that I would like to, share more thoughts on. And then I have written 1-sentence reviews of the rest, which I will share with you. I will link, as always, in the description box below my profile on Goodreads and on Storygraph. I do review every book that I read on both of those sites for now. If you would like to follow my reviews or be friends on there, that's great and welcome. If you'd like to hear more about, or rather read more about, what I thought of any of these books, you can do so on either of those websites, and my reviews across the two are basically the same, or at least the text is the same. I will kind of apologize in advance. This 1-sentence situation does mean that I will be doing a little bit more reading off of a sheet than I normally would, but I am looking forward to this. Okay, so just some statistics to start in terms of my reading January, February, and March. Across those 3 months, I again read 24 books, and that totaled 6,694 pages. I do have a spreadsheet that keeps track for me. I will link the Etsy shop where I got that in the description box as well. Of the 24 books I read, 16 of those were works of fiction, and 8 of those were works of nonfiction. I would say that is kind of my typical distribution there. Perhaps a little bit more nonfiction than usual, if anything, but that's pretty standard for me. My average ratings across the 3 months, my average star rating of the books that I'd read in January was a 4, which is kind of typical for me. My rating average in February was a 3.7, and my rating average in March was 3.9. So that is how things have been going so far. Pretty good. And of the 24 books that I have read thus far in the first quarter, 3 of those were works of translation. I've mentioned before that I'm trying to read more translated books. I don't have really firm numbers necessarily. I aimed for I think 10 last year, but I've been enjoying that. So that's the overall stats. Now on to some highlights of my reading quarter. So the 7 books I chose to highlight here with a bit of a longer review are all books that I enjoyed and that I thought might be of interest to my viewers as well. They include some fiction and some nonfiction, and I'm excited to share them. So the first, these are in no particular order other than the order that they're kind of piled here. The first book that I want to talk a little bit more about is this book, The Modern Fortune Teller's Field Guide by Tom Benjamin, with a foreword by Maria Minnis. If you are here on my channel via the tarot content on my channel, you're very likely familiar with Tom Benjamin, who of course has a channel here on YouTube and has written a number of tarot books previously. This is his most recent tarot book. It is published with Crossed Crow Books, and I really, really liked this book a lot. It is a book that in the preface is described as being, a book that's about being a reader more than a book about how to read. So this is quite different from, I think, a lot of tarot books that are available on the market, in that it's not a deck that is a deck. It's not a deck at all. It's not a book that is designed to try to teach a total beginner how to work with tarot. It's not a instructional text trying to teach you a new approach to tarot necessarily. It is really, to me, a collection of essays on topics like fortune-telling ethics, on topics like free will versus fatedness. There is some discussion of teaching tarot and kind of pedagogical considerations to designing tarot workshops and classes. I think this is an area that Tom Benjamin really excels in. I have taken a workshop or two, I think, one in person and one online with Tom Benjamin, both of which were excellent. And so there's some discussion there about, designing those kinds of learning experiences. I think that this would be relevant to people who work with other systems than tarot. Like if you're a geomancer, for example, lots of the topics would be relevant, though the examples are very predominantly tarot. I appreciate this as a solidly intermediate book. I feel like the market for tarot books is very overwhelmed with, total beginner-oriented titles, and so whenever there's something that's geared towards someone more advanced, I'm immediately curious about it, and this is really good in that respect. I like that it puts an equity-oriented lens and politic, up front and very clear, throughout. And I like that it's argumentative, but it's not dogmatic in tone, I would say. Like, there are definitely arguments here, many of which I'm, in broadly speaking, kind of would say that I'm in congruence with, a handful of which I would say, I feel quite differently about, but a lot of the approach, I think, is really about trying to get the reader to think about things that they may have taken for granted before, and to kind of think through the implications of different aspects of, how they read, and particularly how they read for others. There is a section on reading for yourself here, but it is, I would say, predominantly focused on providing readings for other people, which also I think makes it different than a lot of books that are available. So that is a book that I really enjoyed reading early in the year in January. The second book that I want to talk about is one that I don't have a physical copy to show you, but I will, put something up here for the titles that I don't have. And that is a book called Speculative Whiteness, Science Fiction and the Alt-Right by Jordan S. Carroll. This is an intense book. It's quite short. It has quite a focused scope. This was a Hugo winner very recently. And it looks at kind of the intersections between science fiction's emergence as a genre, and like particularly kind of early science fiction, and racist thinking, effectively. It is focused on literature. There is some conversation in this book about science fiction, television, and film. So the author does talk about, for example, racist reactions to Nichelle Nichols in the original Star Trek series, for example. But the focus is very much on books, ultimately, and mostly on what I would say are older science fiction books. It's really not focused on new releases so much. And he encapsulates his argument in making the point that, and this is a direct quote, the alt-right seizes upon the speculative genres to dictate who has the right to speculate in the first place, end quote. This is I would say, really important read for people who read, a lot of science fiction, for people who want to write science fiction, for people who are engaged in kind of science fiction spaces. This is, I would say, a pretty readable book. It is, I want to say it's scholarly, but it's not overly academic in tone in a way that a non-scholar audience would not be able to engage with it. I don't think. I think it's written pretty accessibly. I learned a lot of things about the history of science fiction that I didn't necessarily know. And on that basis alone, as well as I think the strength of some of the author's arguments, I would definitely recommend checking this out. The third book that I want to talk about a little bit that I really appreciated was a book called A Soldier's Story, Revolutionary Writings by a New African Anarchist by Kwesi Balagoon. And this is a book that's kind of by and about Kwesi Balagoon, who was a member of the Black Panther Party, who was a member of the Black Liberation Army, who was an activist and a revolutionary and a tactician and a theorist, who was a prolific letter writer. A lot of the book is excerpts from letters that he wrote, and then also some excerpts from some speeches that he wrote and gave, including in a court context. He identified as an anarchist, which was not necessarily typical or common in the kind of milieus that he was working with at the time. And this book was just really interesting. So half of it, roughly half, is his own writings, and then the other half is kind of remembrances and writings about him by people who, were engaged in activist work with him, or were familiar with him and knew him in some way, or who were influenced by his thinking. He passed away in 1986, and I feel like so much of the kinds of things that he's discussing, in terms of his analysis and his consideration of, social movements and organizing, was so thought-provoking and very much relevant and worth reading and interesting. And this is a title that I just kind of stumbled upon because of familiarity with the publisher. I really hadn't been familiar with him before. And, as a kind of historical work, for me as someone who's interested in the history of social movements, very, very good, very worth reading. So definitely recommend. From here, I want to get into the fiction. So the first fiction title that I want to say a little bit about, it was a special one for me for a couple of reasons. But one of those is just that this is the first time that I have ever gotten a really special edition copy of a book, I think. And this book is Sauti Terror's Short Stories from the Unique Universe Created by Contemporary African Writers anthology. And this is from Flame Tree Press, and it is shiny. and it has beautiful, you know, painted edges and gold bookmark. So like when I saw this, I was like, oh, this is a treat. And the local bookstore that I order books from, like the person who checked out my purchase was like, wow, as well, this is a really special book. This is, of course, set in the Sautyverse universe, which is a, the website describes as an Afrocentric science fiction shared world. There's an anthology set in this world of short stories by African writers. There's also a novella by Eugen Bacon, who is one of the 3 editors of this anthology, which I've also read and enjoyed. So when I saw that there was a new collection coming out, I had to pick it up. This is really well put together. I would say that it is a really diverse collection. Horror is not my first kind of, I don't want to say it's not my first choice. It's not my most read genre by any means. I'm starting to find what I like in terms of horror. This is not, I would say, this is not terrifying. There's a lot of kind of suspense and kind of slow build kinds of horror in here, I would say. There is some speculative poetry, which I think is interesting. I don't have a lot of experience reading speculative poetry, but I think in a project like this, with this kind of shared universe structure around it, it makes a lot of sense to have it included. And there's some special things about this. I'll say, like, the stories I enjoyed, of course, in a collection I'm going to enjoy some more than others, but overall, very much worth picking up, I would say. There's some just special touches that the editors have included here that I want to mention. One is that they include content warnings, which I appreciate. They don't distinguish which story contains which content, but it is there. I think more collections should do that. It has a story timeline. So in the kind of timeline of the Sautyverse, the shared universe, they have a timeline of where different stories fit. And a little introduction explaining that shared world. And then each of the stories has a haiku that starts it. So, for example, for Eugen Bacon's story, the haiku is: clouds in slow motion, a fork in the wilderness, a maw full of saws. Each story has one of those, and each story has a little introduction, tiny, like one paragraph, that describes the story briefly and then says, "Welcome to," the title of the story. And it just gives a collection a really special feel, in my opinion. So that is a collection that I would definitely suggest picking up. To my knowledge, this is the edition that is available. I initially looked at getting this as a hard copy because it didn't appear that there was an ebook copy. Maybe there will be one in future, or there is one now, but this was a recent release. This book is gorgeous. This book is gorgeous. Next up is a novel, one of a few here. And it is one that I don't know why it took me so long to get to. And that is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, a very well-loved work of fantasy fiction. This is a book that is part of a much broader shared universe and series of books. Somebody can, correct me if I'm wrong in terms of how this is structured. This is my first Robin Hobb experience. My understanding is that this book is the first book in a trilogy, the Live Ship Traders trilogy. That's given right on the cover. But then there are these other trilogies by Robin Hobb, the Farseer trilogy, the Rainwild Chronicles, which is actually based on the inside of here is 4 books, the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. And my understanding is that these all relate to each other. I am not 100% clear on how much, like how linear that is, or how much shared, shared characters or anything like that exist across the different trilogies. This is very much a book one in a trilogy, and book two will pick up, following the same characters, but between trilogies, I'm not so sure. I know the Rain Wilds Chronicles will be related because the Rain Wilds is mentioned in this book, but not super extensively. So I'm curious to see what that's like. It's not super common for me to read a series longer than a trilogy, but I enjoyed this. I plan to pick up book two for sure. For folks who are unfamiliar with this, this is a fantasy novel that follows a series of characters. It's a multi-point of view structure with a lot of points of view, actually. And something distinctive about the world in which this is set in are these sentient live ships. So they are ships, they're, for example, merchant vessels that the figurehead on the bow of the ship becomes sentient and is, in a sense, related to the family whose ship that it is. And this novel follows members of a family and their live ship, and there's various adventures and things going on. Far too much to put in a video, but obviously there's synopses online and blurbs and things like that. I really liked the multi-POV in this. I liked a lot of the world building in this. I think it's really interesting. I feel like at times this almost reads like a historical fiction. Like, there's definitely fantasy elements, obviously, but a lot of the world almost feels historical to me in terms of their depictions of piracy and things like that. There's definitely, I think, some strong research that has gone into this. So I'm glad that I finally got to pick this up. I was given this for a holiday gift, and I will definitely pick up book two. Another case of how did this take me so long to get to this book, to start this series, in fact, is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Adrian Tchaikovsky is quickly becoming a contemporary favorite of mine for both his fantasy and his science fiction. Children of Time is one of his older works. This was published in 2015. So it's backlist anyway. I don't know if it's one of the oldest, but this series now has, I believe, 3 more titles in it after this one, one of which just recently was released. I already have picked up book 2, borrowed from my mom, because she's been reading this as well. And I'm definitely going to read book 2 soon, I think. Though I also have another novel by Adrian Tchaikovsky to continue another series that I love. So I have to space them out a little bit. Children of Time follows people on a generational ship that has left a, destroyed Earth, basically, or uninhabitable Earth. One of several generational ships. And they come to a planet that was, ostensibly previously seeded for human habitability, right? On the back of the book, it explains, following their ancestors' star maps, they discover the greatest treasure of a past age, a world terraformed and prepared for human life. But not all is right in this new Eden. The planet is not waiting for them, pristine and unoccupied. So, of course, there is a sentient and fairly advanced society living on this planet that these humans have, decided is the place that they want to set down. And it has pretty strong horror elements in addition to being a science fiction book. Don't pick this up if you're arachnophobic, as a bit of a spoiler hint. It is a book that spans a very, very long time period, with there being kind of cryosleep technology for the humans to, move over long periods in space while, not aging quite so rapidly. And the other species in the book has an ability to kind of pass on genetic memories in a much more direct and explicit, continuous way. So there's this kind of continuity built in for both the humans and this other society, with the book spanning, centuries, which I thought was really interesting and really well done. It poses some really interesting questions. This series is really good. If you haven't read Adrian Tchaikovsky, definitely pick up something of his. This would not be a bad place to start. And next up, the last of the 7 that I wanted to give a bit more conversation about is The Luminous Fairies and Mothra. And this is by Takahiko Fukunaga, Yoshi Hota, and Shinichiro Nakamura. This is a book that I totally stumbled upon on NetGalley. Thank you, NetGalley. I was totally unfamiliar with. I thought it looked cool, so I picked it up. This is actually a 3-part novella, with each part written by one of the 3 authors who I'd mentioned, that was written in 1961, with the intention of this being an inspiration for a kaiju film about Mothra. And it is written in a style that I learned in reading this book is common to some Japanese types of writing, which is kind of like a relay style where one author starts and then it passes along to the next author, and he continues to write and then it passes on to the next. And again, as a novella, this is a very short or fairly short work about Mothra and the Luminous Fairies. But most of the actual book that I read is an afterword by Jeffrey Angles, which is all about the kind of context of this novella. It gets into some of the themes that the novella is dealing with, like nuclear weapons testing and colonialism and international treaty making and the desirability or not of international treaty signing, and the role of journalism and all kinds of things that this novella touches on. This afterword really explains, in the historical context that this novel was written, the kinds of context these authors were writing into and what they were doing. The afterword is really good. It explains things about the novella that just reading it on its own, I would have been kind of scratching my head about, like, why is this like this? This book was just a total surprise, and I thought it was really, really good. I really enjoyed this. So I would say that if you are interested in kind of histories around kind of monster movies and maybe Japanese cinema in particular, this would be very much worth reading. I thought it was really, really good. That brings us to the 1-sentence reviews of all of the rest of the books that I read in January, February, and March. And this is where I'll be doing a little bit more reading. So apologies for that. I have the paper propped up here. I would not ever attempt 1-sentence reviews spontaneously. We'll say that. Before I start sharing these, I just want to say that my choices of what to put a longer review and what to put as a 1-sentence review don't necessarily correlate to how much I liked or didn't like particular titles. There are 5-star books, or like what were for me 5-star books, that I am now going to tell you about in 1 sentence. So if you want to see my star ratings in kind of more detail, again, I'll put my Goodreads and Storygraph links below. I also just want to say that, if you know me at all, you will know this, but in case this is the first time you're seeing me, I'm just going to tell you how hard it is going to be for me to get through these 1-sentence reviews without elaborating. This is not how I operate by default, but I wrote 1 sentence for each of the rest of the books, and I am going to tell you what they are. And if you have, any questions or further discussion, please do comment. I'm happy to talk further there. But for here, I'm setting myself that flash nonfiction challenge, and I'm going to give you 1 sentence about each of the rest of the books that I read. Cronus by P. Jelly Clark. Fantastic standalone short story of anti-racist alternative history featuring time travel that I'd highly recommend. When We Are Kin, The History and Future of Afro-Indigenous Solidarity by Kyle T. Mays. Socialist, Marxist, anti-racist, anti-colonial analysis of relationships between Black and Indigenous social movements, mostly in North America, that is ambitious, well-researched, and fascinating. Fate's Bane by C.L. Clark. lesbian romantic fantasy fable novella in which I enjoyed the writing and world building a lot more than the romance, which could have been left out. Ammonite by Nicola Griffith. Beautifully written 90s feminist sci-fi following an emissary on a human colony world with only female characters that I would definitely recommend. The War Beyond by Andrea Stewart. Middle book in a solid ecological fantasy series that I liked better than the first book. Daughter Who Remains by Nnedi Okorafor. Conclusion of a novella trilogy that feels like an abrupt, albeit satisfying end, but which wasn't my favorite of the three. The Heart of the Reproach by Adrian Tchaikovsky. A short story in one of my favorite current fantasy series that zooms in on a quarter of an occupied city that is haunted by its deposed former rulers. The Ballad of Perilous Graves by Alex Jennings. An impressive debut urban fantasy set in a vibrant, magical New Orleans with diverse representation, musical themes, somewhat clunky pacing, and perhaps one too many elements squished in. Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New World View by Richard Tarnas. A classic of mundane astrology tracing correlations of mostly Western history with the outer planets, written by an author who is far more enamored with psychoanalytic concepts than I am. The Future God of Love by Dilman Dila. A short novella following a renowned but writer's blocked storyteller with great world building but one-dimensional representations of women. A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things, A Guide to Capitalism, Nature, and the Future of the Planet by Raj Patel and Jason W. Moore. A good recommendation from a friend that explains world ecology concepts from a Marxist perspective for a non-academic audience. Everything We Thought Was Beautiful. Interviews with radical Palestinian women, edited by the Shoal Collective. Interviews conducted 2018 to 2025 with diverse women in Palestine and the Palestinian diaspora that is difficult and important reading. The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain by Sofia Samatar. Heavy science fiction novella with some world-building inconsistencies and a very strong feeling of being Snowpiercer in space. Pedro the Vast by Simon Lopez Trujillo. Theme-heavy fungal horror that is beautifully written but did not quite captivate me. Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu by Donna Haraway. Dense, experimentally written sci-fi theory with some interesting concepts, but a very problematic emphasis on rapid population reduction. Jackal Jackal, Tales of the Dark Fantastic by Toby Ogundiran. A creepy collection of stories spanning multiple speculative genres that is very much worth checking out. And finally, Backbone of the World by Stephen Graham Jones. Standalone, short, weird horror that has forever changed how I think of prairie dogs. With that, you have heard a lot of one-sentence reviews, which is not a thing that I ever thought that I would do, but I've had a lot of fun attempting. I'm not going to say that I'm ever going to do this again. But I appreciate being set the challenge, and I hope that I have risen to the occasion. If you would like to chat about any of these books or let me know what you've been reading, please do so in the comments. I would love to chat books with you. And I hope to see you at the end of April this month for a much more reasonable single month reading wrap up. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.